Hello, everybody, friends of Here to Be. Today, I'm so honored to have here a special guest that is actually one of the world leading pollination ecologists, Professor Jeff Ollerton, who is visiting professor at the University of Northampton, UK, and Kunming Institute of Botany, China. Welcome, Jeff. Thank you very much to be here with us.
Thank you very much, Daniela. It's a real pleasure, and thank you for the very nice introduction.
So let's start our interview, because actually we have to say that next week is gonna be there will be a particular occasion, which is the World Bee Day. And actually this interview is in correspondence of this particular event, and we are, of course, talking about pollinators, and so also bees. But moreover, I very interesting to present your book that also I found it really fascinating and entertaining and suitable to a general audience, not just a scientist. And it talks about pollination. So the title is Pollinators and Pollination, right? And it talks about...
There's a copy there, in fact.
Yeah, I have two, of course. And so it talks about the importance of pollinators as an issue and the center of current debate as well. So as a first question, I would like to ask you, how did you end up with the idea of writing this book, Jeff?
Well, it all started when I was a child. And my interest in natural history, and like so many ecologists, had a passion for natural history, which then came through into a professional life as an ecologist. I hadn't taken a lot of notice of pollinators and flowers probably until I started my first degree, and then my PhD was on pollination ecology and plant reproductive ecology. So that's going back to 1993. So the book really is a summation of a lot of the things that I've learned and worked on and that have intrigued me really over the past 30 years, almost 30 years, I guess. The reason why it came together into a book was because I've always enjoyed writing. Writing has always been a big part of what I do, above and beyond the science. And in 2012, I started a blog, and that was quite successful. And one of the reasons for starting the blog was to put a lot of the sort of small bits of writing, fragments of writing that I'd been doing, to find a home for it. And so they ended up on the blog. And actually quite a lot of the material that's in the book comes from the blog. And that was a really good way of sort of testing ideas, testing thoughts and ways of presenting information for a broad audience. And what I found with the blog was that the people who were reading it and commenting on it were scientists, other scientists, but also interested members of the public as well, and conservation professionals within the middle. So it seemed to appeal to a wide range. And so when it came to writing the book, that was what I tried to do. I tried to appeal to that broad range. And the reviews that I've had so far on the book seem to suggest that it's worked. So yeah, it's up to the reader.
So basically it started also with the blog interaction, so that inspired you to continue this interaction with the public, with something more, of course, like a book with more content, more comprehensive.
It's a good way of, if people are thinking about writing a book about their professional lives, it's a good way to start, because it allows you to write small kind of focused bits of writing that can then be brought together afterwards. So it's quite a good way to do it. It works for me.
That's also a really good tip for starting with writing a book. Okay, that's great, Jeff. Can you tell us which are the main aspects that the book wants to cover?
Sure. Yeah. So the title of the book is Pollinators and Pollination, Nature and Society. So there's really 4 aspects there within the title, which sort of summarizes the book, I guess. So a lot of books that have written about pollinators deal just with the animals, the bees and the bats and the hummingbirds and the flies and so on, that act as pollinators. And I wanted to cover that, obviously, and talk about their diversity and why they're important. But I also wanted to bring the plant perspective in there, the pollination perspective, because I feel very strongly that to really understand what pollinators are, you have to understand the plant perspective. And actually, to understand what plants are, you really have to understand the pollinator perspective. So the 2 things are really important. And then the second part of the title, Nature and Society, is really about the role of pollinators and the pollination services that they provide to flowers, to plants in the wider environment, regardless of whether people are involved. But also the societal importance of pollinators, how pollinators and pollination improves their lives, provides us with food, provides a whole range of what are termed ecosystem services. And so there are a number of different little case studies in there, one of which, of course, is about coffee, which I'm very, very fond of. Cheers.
Yeah, me too. Coffee? So, in a glass, but yeah, still coffee.
And actually, so, you know, some of the statistics that I worked up for the book, things like the fact that it takes, I calculated that the global coffee crop at the moment requires 25 trillion flower visits by bees, mostly wild bees. The managed honeybees play a role as well, but mostly wild bees. 25 trillion every year to support that crop, to support something that we completely take for granted. But it's you know, it's a hundreds of billions of dollars every year kind of industry, which benefits lots of small scale farmers in the developing world, in the global south. Most coffee production is done on a fairly small scale. And so it provides a livelihood for those farmers. Yes, it provides profits for large companies like Starbucks and so on, and maybe they could do a little bit more about bee conservation, and it's something I talk about in the book. But nonetheless, it's a globally important crop, which, yeah, we take it for granted. Yeah. But then the other thing that we take for granted, of course, is just fresh water. Can't drink coffee without water, and actually plants play an enormous role in providing us with fresh water. You know, local vegetation changes microclimate, changes weather patterns, water filtering through the earth into aquifers is purified to a large degree by plants, and almost 90% of the flowering plants are pollinated by insects and other animals, and so without those pollinators, those plants populations wouldn't thrive, wouldn't survive. So it all ties together, and so that's what is kind of encompassed within the title. But there's other stuff within the book as well. Part of it is about my journey towards understanding, what I understand at the moment, and so there's some personal history within there, and actually, journey towards realizing how little we understand about these interactions, even though we've
there
been
is
studying
some
them.
example in particular that you would like to share with us? Any case of study that most surprised you during your research journey? Any anecdotes?
Gosh, yeah. I mean, as I say, some of the statistics about coffee production, so on, really blew my mind, and I had to redo the calculations several times just to see whether I got that right. There's some interesting stuff in there. We talk about the level of sort of ignorance or how much we don't understand. Again, I did some back of the envelope calculations which suggest that we probably have some kind of information, some kind of knowledge about 10% about the pollinators of 10% of the flowering plants. Now, when you consider there are 352,000 species of flowering plants, we think we know about the pollinators of about 10%. Excuse me, 10% of those. So there's enormous, enormous amount of knowledge that we've still got to gather. Enormous amount that we still don't understand. And I'll give you for example, one of the plant families that I've worked on really since the early 1990s is the family of Pollinators, which is the dogbane and milkweed family, which is about the 10th largest flowering plant family, something like 5,500 species within there. And we've worked on different groups within that family over the years. We've published quite a lot about the pollinators and so on. And over time, we've published examples of pollination systems within that family, which were completely unknown. Things like pollination in South Africa, for example, pollination by spider hunting wasps, in which the flowers are actually camouflaged. They're indistinguishable from the background vegetation. So the wasps are finding them purely by scent. They're following these odor trails and finding them by scent. And the suspicion is that the flowers smell like the spiders that they're looking for, but we've no proof of that yet. But then more recently, a Chinese colleague and I, along with some other colleagues, published a study of an endemic Chinese species of Apostanaceae, which is cockroach pollinated. Now, we don't think of cockroaches as being pollinators usually, and this is only I think the 12th known example of a specialized cockroach pollinated plant, and it's a rainforest plant. And again, I suspect it's far more common than we realize.
Which is the degree of specialization of the flower? I'm wondering.
Yeah, I mean, well, there's so the flower itself. I've not smelt the flower, but my Chinese colleague Wu Zhenjiang informs me that it smells exactly the way you expect a cockroach pollinated flower to smell. So fairly unpleasant. And the timing of flower opening, the timing of nectar production, it's nocturnal. And there are several species of cockroaches which act as effective pollinators. So it's what we term function.
Multiple species.
Multiple different species. Yeah. Oh. So it's functionally specialized in that it's all cockroaches, but it's a generalist in the sense that a number of different cockroaches will act as pollinators. So and we're uncovering those kinds of stories all of the time, and a few years ago it was discovered that some seagrasses are pollinated by small worms and crustaceans in the ocean. And there's really good experimental evidence to support that. These sorts of things are coming out all the time. The deeper we look at these interactions, the more that we discover. Yeah, and so some of those stories are in the book, but there's many more still to be discovered.
Yeah. Your book actually has a really all-inclusive approach about the interactions that also human beings have with pollinators and insects world and animal world, and also these fascinating cases that are really cool. So it's hard to find a book like that incorporate in just one book, single book, such you know, a broad array of examples and contents, far-ranging contents. Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, the trade-off there is with depth. So it's got a very broad perspective, but the depth is less. And you know, there's not very much in there about breeding systems, for example, self-compatibility and incompatibility and so on, which is not an area I've worked on very much. I've done a little bit of work on it, but not very much. But there are other books which cover that area. I wanted to give a broad overview, but the trade-off is with depth. You know, the book, if I'd really wanted to be comprehensive, the book could have been 3 or 4 times as long. But then nobody would have read it. So.
What are bees and the plants for you, Jeff? And what actually should, for you, humans share the world with this amazing life form?
It's a good question. I mean, for me personally, I guess they've provided me with a career. And I've written a book about it, which is hopefully is interesting. And yeah, I mean, you know, we talked about ecosystem services and crop pollination and so on, and clearly, you know, I could go through my kitchen at the moment and pick up things like, you know, apples here from the fruit bowl, which are bee pollinated or insect pollinated. And so on that very kind of fundamental level, they're important to society. But on a personal level, you know, when I go for a walk in the local woodlands or along the coast here in Denmark, where we're living now, my wife sometimes gets a little bit frustrated because I kind of stop every 5 minutes to take a photograph of a flower or a.
My husband too. My husband too.
It's one of those things, but it's important to me to be noticing what's happening around me, and I think more and more people are doing that. So you know, I'm quite active on Twitter, for example. And one of the things I've noticed is that you know, there's a few people on Twitter who are regularly posting about pollinators and bees. People like Stephen Falk, Kate Bradbury, Dave Goulston, of course, Jane Stout, but you know, Lynn Dix, all of these people. And whenever they post about bees and pollinators, there's a lot of interest in there, just from a, you know, a wider set of the public, general public. And I think that's raised awareness, and people are more and more inclined to get actively involved. So in Britain, there's been this campaign called No Mow May. So meaning don't go out in May to mow your lawn. Let things like dandelion and clovers and daisies and so on flower within your lawn. Allow the bees and other pollinators to take the nectar and pollen there. So it's about, you know, raising awareness, and certainly Edward O. Wilson has this term biophilia, meaning the human love of nature. And certainly for most people, certainly when they're children, there's a deep biophilia. They enjoy being within nature, and I think that reflects the fact that we're part of nature. You know, we're not separate from it. No matter how much, no matter how much we would like to think we are separate from nature, we are We are absolutely not. You know, we've got nature on us, fungi and bacteria on our skins, eyelash mites, all of these kinds of things. We've got nature within us, gut flora, and so on. And it's an important part of what we are. And if we don't treat it with a little bit more respect, then in the future.
Yeah, if we don't feed our natural component, actually, we may suffer. we actually is a part of our well-being. So, and I really love this vision, Jeff.
Yeah,
really.
Well, it's something I talk about a lot with my wife, Corinne Black. She's a therapist. Her background is in therapy and talking therapy, and she writes articles and books about that.
Yeah,
as
I
well.
look forward to talk with her as well, and we will have an interview.
But it's I think, you know, being married to a therapist has opened my eyes to the importance of nature for health and well-being, and just for getting out there and being part of it a little bit more.
So basically, for disseminating these actually contents, do you, like you said, do you have a blog, and then you on Twitter? Yeah, you are very active. I see that, and also through the book also. But do you also have any plan to do presentations or a webinar in the next future? I don't know, just
I've been doing quite a lot of online talks and webinars for organizations such as Bug Life, for example, and wildlife trusts and so on, as part of my my sort of work portfolio as a self-employed consultant scientist. I do training for organizations and for groups, for ecological consultancies, for example, mainly focused on pollinators and pollination and why they're important, but broader biodiversity as well. You know, got an interest beyond just the pollinators and pollination. I do a lot of writing as well, articles for magazines such as British Wildlife. I've got one coming out in the May issue, actually, about a very neglected plant, which has fascinated me since I was a child. So the plant is common elder, Sambucus nigra, which is often kind of dismissed as this weedy, shrubby tree, but actually has an absolutely fascinating natural history and an absolutely fascinating cultural history in Northern Europe as well. Lots of mythology and cultural associations with that particular tree, and so that article is just about to come out. I've written for, you know, things like New Scientist and Gardener's World magazine. I had a piece in there last year, and actually I've got another piece coming out in later in the summer in there. So it's about getting these ideas out, getting these messages out to a wider audience of naturalists and gardeners. You know, gardeners have a huge role to play, I think, in conserving pollinators. And just
because as a freelancer as well, you also is part of your work this and
that's right.
And also, have you got other projects for the future? In some anticipation about?
Yes, there's a few. So as visiting professor at Kunming Institute of Botany, we have a project that's ongoing at the moment, which is looking at the balance between animal pollinated plants and wind pollinated plants in different plant communities around the world, and how that might change during climate change, what that might mean for climate change. And I was hoping to be out in China at the moment working on that, but of course because of the ongoing pandemic situation, I can't be there. But I'll be doing
I know
work
something
remotely
because I'm here in China, so
yes, of course.
yeah.
Yeah, of course. But hopefully, perhaps next year, perhaps, you know, if things get better, I'll go out next year. But in the meantime, we're going to be working on that project remotely. I'm involved with a large European research project at the moment, which we've just submitted. So we're waiting to hear what the result is for that from that submission. But that will be looking at grassland conservation and pollinator. Part of it is about pollinators within grasslands, and that's with colleagues in Poland, Finland, Germany, Romania, you know, across Europe.
Wow, fantastic!
It's, you know, it's one of those things. You know, the statistics are always against you when you apply for large grants, but you know, hopefully it'll get published. And I'm working on another book at the moment.
This is really such a surprise.
Well,
we're talking about a book, and yeah, you are.
Yeah.
You're so prolific.
Yeah. Well, I've got ideas for probably 3 or 4 books at the moment, some of which I've done work on in the past, and then because I was working full-time as an academic at a university, I never had the time to complete them. So I'm hoping over the next couple of years these books are going to start to appear. The one that I'm working on at the moment is a follow-up to the one that I've just published. I'm not going to tell you what it's about. The publisher has told me to keep quiet.
Okay. No, we don't talk about that.
We're just referring to it as Project B at the moment. Project
okay.
B. But I'm hoping that will be out next year. I'm perhaps
fantastic.
A fifth of the way through it, but it's, yeah, you know, when you're trying to earn a living doing lots of other things, you know, writing sometimes gets pushed to the side. But
not always to find a space, because also requires a lot of dedication and inspiration. So you cannot do just. But
I enjoy it, and I think that's you know, a lot of scientists enjoy doing the science, they enjoy doing the experiments, the analysis, the data collection, maybe even giving presentation. But when it comes to actually doing the writing, they really struggle. And you know, I sometimes struggle with my writing as well, but I enjoy the process. I enjoy getting the words down on paper, and so I think I'm fortunate in that respect.
Yeah, definitely. So thank you very much, Jeff, for sharing your contents, the contents about your book, and your stories, and also your vision, which is amazing, an amazing vision that comprises the human beings as part of nature, with all the connections with other life forms. And this is really fantastic. So
it's nice of you to say so. I mean, I don't understand why everybody doesn't think that way, but perhaps that's just the way my brain is wired.
So hopefully to see you in China.
It would be great.
That would be great.
It would be great. Yeah.
And I wait you for the next interview about your next book.
Right. Yeah, I look forward to it. Okay. Thank you again for the invitation.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you very much.
Okay. Ciao. Bye.
Ciao.